The Phil Silvers Show ran 4 seasons and won 3 straight Emmys for Best Comedy. Now, in 2026, every regular cast member is gone. 8 lives ended across 4 decades. One actor died at age 51, 2 hours after a friend promised him a comeback role. Number 1 is Phil Silvers, who played Master Sergeant Ernest G. Bilko for 143 episodes and never quite escaped him after. Bilko was the motorpool sergeant at Fort Baxter, who ran the entire base as one long con. Gary Marshall once said sitcoms before Bilko hummed like an air conditioner. Phil Silvers came in like gangbusters. Born Philip Silver in Brooklyn in 1911, one of 8 children of Russian-Ukrainian Jewish immigrants whose father riveted the iron skeletons of early New York skyscrapers. Phil started singing in theaters at 11 when the projectors broke. He wrote the lyrics for Sinatra's Nancy with the Laughing Face, won a Tony for Top Banana in 1952, then took the 1956 Best Actor Emmy for Bilko. CBS canceled the show in spring 1959 while it was still beating Milton Berle in the ratings. The reason was math. 22 cast salaries cost more than continuing the program, and syndication was already projected to run for decades. Reruns aired on NBC for 40 years afterward, and Silvers received none of that money. His one-time £30,000 fee for the 1967 Carry On film followed. That camel was the largest sum that British series had ever paid a guest star, but the money stopped the day he flew home. Net worth at death was estimated between $2 and $10 million. That gap so wide because compulsive gambling depleted most of what came in. He married twice. 5 daughters came from the second marriage to Evelyn Patrick, a former Miss Florida. Kathy played Jenny Piccolo on Happy Days and shared scenes with him as her television father. She has spoken openly about his gambling and his depression. In August 1972, he suffered a stroke during the Broadway run of A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, which left him with permanently slurred speech and ended his theatrical career. On November 1, 1985, Phil Silvers died in his sleep at his Century City apartment. He was 74. The cause was heart failure. Family members said his mind had drifted back into the rhythms of Bilko during his final weeks, that at moments he was becoming the character he had created. He rests at Mount Sinai Memorial Park in the Hollywood Hills. Garden of Traditions, Map 1, Lot 1004, Unit 1, Space A. Sergeant Bilko was the king of the con. Phil Silvers was a man whose private cons ran inside the same skull as the public ones and never gave back what they took. Paul Ford takes the second slot. He played Colonel John T. Hall, Bilko's commanding officer, the man who outranked the sergeant who actually ran the base. Hall was bureaucratic, irritable, and incapable of remembering which scheme he was being conned into that week. Ford never played him as a fool. He played him as a competent man being slowly worn down by one sergeant's relentless cleverness, and that distinction is why the comedy worked. Born Paul Ford Weaver in Baltimore in 1901, he attended Dartmouth for 1 year before taking up his father's profession as a traveling salesman. Then, the Great Depression hit. The sales career collapsed. Franklin Roosevelt's Works Progress Administration brought him into a federally funded puppet theater under the Federal Theater Project, and that is how a 40-something former salesman became an actor. Paul Ford stayed an FDR Democrat for the rest of his life. The financial story is the same one every Bilko regular got handed. Ford earned Emmy nominations as Colonel Hall, but never won. He earned no participation in the 4 decades of syndication revenue that followed cancellation. His per-episode pay was a flat network fee. When The Music Man went to Broadway in 1957 and to film in 1962, he reprised his Mayor Shin role for flat fee both times. The producers of Grease cast him as Principal McGee for the 1978 film, a role he died before he could play. They rewrote it for Eve Arden. His marriage to Nell Weaver lasted over 4 decades. 4 children. The marriage held through the Depression sales route years, the puppet theater years, the Broadway breakthrough at age 52, the Hollywood film years, and the New York retirement. One Depression-era quote followed him to the end. "My kids used to think everyone lived on peanut butter sandwiches." By 1972, he had retired and lived 4 more quiet years with Nell on Long Island. On April 12, 1976, Paul Ford died of a heart attack at Nassau Hospital in Mineola, New York. He was 74. His final on-screen role had been a doctor in the obscure 1972 comedy, Richard, a quiet exit for a man who had built half a career out of comically losing to Phil Silvers every Tuesday night on CBS. He rests at Holy Cross Cemetery in Culver City, California. Colonel Hall was a man being slowly broken by another man's con. Paul Ford was the New Deal puppeteer who lasted 40 years in a profession that took him in at 40. The third name on this list belongs to the actor who knew Phil Silvers the longest. Herbie Faye played Corporal Sam Fender across 139 episodes, short, bald, perpetually slightly bewildered. Faye and Silvers had been working together since 1928. 27 years before either of them stepped onto a soundstage, Herbie Faye was already on a burlesque stage with the kid whose name would later go on the show. Born in New York City in 1899, Faye came up through vaudeville opposite silent film actress Mildred Harris. He worked Broadway in Top Banana in 1951, the show where Phil Silvers won his Tony and where Faye stayed loyally in the supporting cast. When Silvers landed his network sitcom in 1955, the first person he called was the old burlesque partner who had carried him through 27 years of one-night stands. Herbie Faye did not land a major screen credit until he was 56. Those years between his burlesque partnership and Bilko premiering were spent grinding through nightclubs, cash gigs, and meals for pay. When the show ended in 1959, Silvers brought him onto the new Phil Silvers Show in 1963 specifically to keep him on a paycheck. Faye saw no syndication money from either show. In April 1980, Harvey Lembeck organized a Bilko reunion in Las Vegas for Herbie Faye's 80th birthday. Phil Silvers, Billy Sands, and Alan Melvin all came. Faye was in poor health by then, but reportedly overjoyed to see them in one room one more time. 8 months later, on June 28, 1980, Herbie Faye died of heart failure in Las Vegas at 81. He was cremated. No public marker exists. The man who knew Phil Silvers longer than anyone else on the call sheet has no grave that fans can visit. Corporal Sam Fender was the platoon's tired old veteran. Herbie Faye was the friend who carried Silvers through 27 years before cameras ever found either of them, and got carried back in return, all the way to a Vegas birthday 8 months before the end. Number 4 is Morris Gosfield, who played Private Dwayne Doberman, the platoon's dumpiest, slowest, most lovable soldier, the one whose unfailing logic was that anything he had read in a comic book had to be true. Doberman was popular enough that DC Comics published 11 issues of a Private Doberman solo comic between 1957 and 1960. Children loved him. Maurice Gosfield earned a 1959 Emmy nomination for Best Supporting Actor in a Comedy Series. He had walked into the open casting call as an unknown 50-something character actor with a long stage resume nobody could verify. He walked out as the Doberman that became a comic book franchise. Born in New York City in 1913 and raised partly in Philadelphia and Evanston, Illinois, Gosfield started with the Ralph Bellamy and Melvin Douglas players around 1930. His Broadway debut came in Siege in 1937. During World War II, he served as a technician 4th grade in the U.S. Army's 8th Armored Division. By the time Bilko premiered, he was 42 and finally famous. After the show ended in 1959, the offers stopped. Gosfield tested for Uncle Fester on The Addams Family in 1964 and was rejected. Fester went to Jackie Coogan. The only paying role he landed that year was voicing Benny the Ball on the Hanna-Barbera cartoon Top Cat. When Top Cat got canceled after 30 episodes, even the cartoon work disappeared. Phil Silvers, writing in his 1973 autobiography, said Gosfield had pomposity and condescension off-screen and behaved like Clark Gable playing a fat man. That book came out 9 years after Gosfield was already in the ground and could no longer answer for himself. On October 14, 1964, performing in a play at a theater in upstate New York, Gosfield kept losing his balance and falling asleep on stage. Doctors diagnosed critical hypertension and put him on 7 medications for the rest of his life. 3 days later, on October 17th, he suffered a heart attack. He stopped breathing in the ambulance. CPR brought him back. He was admitted to a Saranac Lake Hospital and his condition improved. Then his close friend Arnold Stang, the actor who voiced Top Cat, came to visit. Stang told him a Top Cat remake was being planned. Benny the Ball was waiting for him. As soon as he recovered, the work was there. 2 hours after Arnold Stang left the room, Maurice Gosfield suffered a second heart attack. That one killed him. He was 51. Hanna-Barbera canceled the Top Cat remake. They could not find anyone else who could voice Benny the Ball. He rests at Long Island National Cemetery in Farmingdale, New York. His World War II service in the 8th Armored Division placed him among the veterans rather than among the entertainers. Private Doberman was the platoon's most replaceable-looking man. Maurice Gosfield turned out to be the one nobody could replace, in the cartoon, in the show, or anywhere else. If learning that hit you, leave a comment below. Tell me which Bilko cast member you most remember. The next person on this list died mid-laugh, in front of an apartment building audience that thought they were watching a comedy bit. Joe E. Ross arrives 5th. He played Master Sergeant Rupert B. Ritzik for 53 episodes, the henpecked mess sergeant who was Bilko's favorite mark in the poker games and whose stammering "ooh, ooh" became one of the most imitated character beats of the decade. The catchphrase came from a real place. Ross genuinely lost his place in the script, so Phil Silvers learned to deliberately give him the wrong cue. And the panicked exclamation that swept America was a real actor's genuine confusion, weaponized for laughs. Born Joseph Rosovics in Manhattan, in 1914 to Jewish immigrant parents who ran a candy store, he started as a singing waiter at 16, moved into Chicago burlesque, served in the Army Air Forces during the war, and was working a Miami Beach nightclub called Club Zero when Nat Hiken and Phil Silvers spotted him in 1955 and hired him on the spot. Here is what the industry did to him. Joe E. Ross saw none of the syndication income from Bilko and none from Car 54 Where Are You?, the follow-up sitcom Nat Hiken built around him from 1961 to 1963. Both shows aired in reruns for decades while Ross played increasingly small nightclubs to make rent. By the late 1970s, he was living at the Oakwood Apartments in Van Nuys, performing free comedy routines to the neighbors in the building's clubhouse because he could no longer fill paying rooms. His agent Hal Stone told the United Press his only paying work at 68 was nightclub appearances and television commercials. On the night of Friday, August 13, 1982, Ross was performing a comedy routine in that clubhouse. The crowd was clapping and laughing. He leaned over to his wife Arlene and told her something was wrong. He said he did not feel good. Then, he collapsed mid-set of a heart attack. He was rushed to St. Joseph Medical Center in Burbank and pronounced dead. He was 68 years old. The funeral at Forest Lawn was deliberately comic. Friends stood up one after another and told humorous stories about him. Jay Leno delivered the eulogy and later wrote about it in his autobiography. Joe E. Ross rests at Forest Lawn Hollywood Hills Cemetery. Blessed Assurance Section, Map F63, Lot 1582, Single Ground Interment Space 3. The headstone carries the inscription his friends chose. This man had a ball. Sergeant Ritzik was the dumbest sergeant on the base. Joe E. Ross spent 6 decades in show business, died in front of laughing neighbors, and got buried under a punchline. Number 6 brings Harvey Lembeck, who played Corporal Rocco Barbella, the Brooklyn-accented, loud, fast-talking second banana in Bilko's Inner Circle. The character's name came directly from Rocky Graziano, born Rocco Barbella, who served as casting consultant on the series. Lembeck brought to the part the same pudgy, perfectly timed verbal energy he had already perfected as Sergeant Harry Shapiro in the stage and screen versions of Stalag 17. He was the show's most reliable second engine of comedy after Silvers himself. Born in Brooklyn in 1923, the son of a button manufacturer, Lembeck started as a dancer at the 1939 New York World's Fair with his future wife, Caroline Dubbs. They performed as the Dancing Carols. He served in the U.S. Army during World War II, earned a broadcasting degree at NYU on the GI Bill, originated the role of Insignia in the 1948 Broadway production of Mr. Roberts, and originated Sergeant Shapiro in Stalag 17 on Broadway in 1951, reprising the role 2 years later in Billy Wilder's film. The financial story is the familiar one. Bilko never gave residuals to supporting cast. When CBS sold the reruns into syndication in 1960, Lembeck saw none of it. His American International Beach Party films of the 1960s, Beach Party, Bikini Beach, Pajama Party, Beach Blanket Bingo, How to Stuff a Wild Bikini, were each budgeted under $500,000, with returning cast taking flat fees rather than back-end participation. So Harvey Lembeck pivoted. In 1964, he founded the Harvey Lembeck Comedy Workshop and taught comedy there for the next 18 years. The students who trained under him included Robin Williams, John Ritter, Penny Marshall, and Cindy Williams. He stayed married to Caroline Dubbs for 38 years. 2 children, both in the business. His son, Michael Lembeck, became a television and film director. His daughter, Helene, had a screen career before retiring. On January 5, 1982, Harvey Lembeck was guest starring in an episode of Mork and Mindy, Robin Williams' sitcom. He suffered a heart attack on the set. He collapsed as he was leaving the soundstage and died. He was 58. The man who had taught Robin Williams how to do comedy died on Robin Williams' set, in the middle of doing the work he had taught everyone else how to do. Phil Silvers, in the last interview he gave before his own death 3 years later, said he was shocked by the news and missed Harvey terribly. Harvey Lembeck rests at Eden Memorial Park Cemetery in Mission Hills, California, Mount Jerusalem section, northeast corner, a few steps below the Court of David. Corporal Barbella was a fast-talking Brooklyn street corner guy. Harvey Lembeck was the comedy teacher who trained a generation that included the star of the show he died on. Hit subscribe before the next name. The 7th cast member on this list was buried within yards of his television best friend. A friendship that started on a soundstage and somehow continued into the same patch of California ground. 7th on the call sheet was Alan Melvin, who played Corporal Steve Henshaw, Bilko's right-hand man, the lieutenant in the schemes, the one who actually executed the operations while Bilko ran the patter. Henshaw was the steady, observational sturdiness in the room. Melvin played him as the kind of presence that made the lead funnier without competing with him. He was a working impressionist and voice actor before Bilko, and his vocal range carried him through the next 50 years of American television. Born in Kansas City, Missouri in 1923 and raised in New York City, Melvin attended Columbia University, served in the U.S. Navy in the Pacific during World War II, and married Amalia Faustina Sestero in March 1944. While working in NBC Radio's sound effects department, he won on Arthur Godfrey's Talent Scouts and broke into television via the Broadway run of Stalag 17. His wife later told the Los Angeles Times that Corporal Henshaw was always his favorite role. But the syndication wealth went to CBS, not to him. He pivoted hard into voice work because animation paid scale per episode and gave him steady income for half a century. The trade-off was anonymity. Millions of American children grew up watching Magilla Gorilla, Bluto on the Popeye cartoons, and Drooper the Lion on the Banana Splits without ever knowing the man's face or name. His marriage to Amalia lasted 63 years. Across the 1960s and 1970s, he played Sergeant Charlie Hacker on Gomer Pyle, USMC, Sam Franklin the Butcher on The Brady Bunch from 1970 to 1973, and Barney Hefner, Archie Bunker's best friend, across All in the Family and Archie Bunker's Place from 1973 to 1983. His final voice role was Magilla Gorilla in the 1994 television film Scooby-Doo in Arabian Nights. After that, he retired. On January 17, 2008, Alan Melvin died of cancer in Los Angeles. He was 84. He rests at Pierce Brothers Westwood Village Memorial Park in Los Angeles, within yards of Carroll O'Connor, the man who had played Archie Bunker, his television best friend across 10 years of 2 sitcoms. A friendship that started on a soundstage somehow continued into the same patch of California ground. Corporal Henshaw was Bilko's quiet right-hand man. Alan Melvin was the actor whose face appeared on 5 different sitcoms and whose voice your children memorized, and who is buried, in the end, beside the man he played opposite on the one that mattered most. The last name on this list is Mickey Freeman, who played Private Fielding Zimmerman across 133 of the 143 episodes. The diminutive private whose catchphrase was "But Sarge," voicing hesitation about whatever scheme Bilko had just proposed. Zimmerman was the cautious one in a platoon of con followers, which made him the audience surrogate. The doubt the viewer was feeling at home, Zimmerman was already saying out loud on the screen. Born Irving Freeman in New York City in 1917, he attended Seward Park High School on the Lower East Side and worked as a nightclub comic and cruise ship comedian before landing the Bilko role at 38. Mickey Freeman appeared in 133 of 143 episodes of a continuously syndicated international hit and received residuals only on the initial network airings. The reruns paid CBS never him. He told interviewers late in life that fans recognized him as Zimmerman, from Guernsey to Hong Kong to New York. The sun never sets on it, he liked to say about the show's global afterlife. But recognition was the only dividend he ever received. He supported himself for the rest of his career through cruise ship comedy bookings, Friars Club gigs, and occasional acting jobs on Naked City, The Equalizer, and The Lloyd Bridges Show. In 1986, 27 years after the show ended, Freeman co-authored a book with Sholem Rubinstein called Bilko, Behind the Lines with Phil Silvers. It remains the only book-length insider memoir of the show. The smallest soldier in Bilko's platoon became the keeper of its memory. On September 21, 2010, Mickey Freeman died in New York City at age 93. Natural causes. He was the last surviving male regular cast member of the show. His burial location has not been publicly recorded. Private Zimmerman was the smallest soldier in Bilko's platoon, and the one who always hesitated. Mickey Freeman outlived everyone else on the call sheet by years, sat down at his typewriter, and wrote the only book that survives, making the last man in the platoon the one who got the final word. They were born in Brooklyn, the Bronx, and Manhattan. Today, their graves are scattered across the Hollywood Hills, Westwood, Culver City, Mission Hills, and one Long Island military plot.